I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Wednesday, September the 4th, where, as bad as it is to say, it looks like it's going to be a natural selection to see who's left in the cattle business here in another year or so. Times are about as tough as they've been for a long time. Nobody's made any money for the last 2 or 3 years on anything. If they did, it was just a part of a basis or something like that, but no straight up money's been made, and that's usually where your smaller producers are at, just straight up money, and they're just nobody's been able to get by. Backgrounding has not worked, feeding has not worked, and it's getting to where now our market position and levels of these calves are not enough to cover your expenses owning calves. So unless you were, and this is kind of where I go back to, unless you were feeding really plain cattle bought way below the market, or you're dealing or handling some older cows, and I know you guys like to have the best genetics and everything, but when times are really tough, the junk guys usually get by. But there's just not enough money out there for the guys that's handling the better quality products to make a living. But it's survival of the fittest out there, and really tough times. And I've heard more guys talk about it in the last 2 or 3 months than I've heard for a long time about how they're really on tough times, and they're not sure how much longer they are for the business. And then in all of this, now we've got this investigation on the collusion and price fixing, and your cattle guy never expects to get a check. He knows that he's not going to see a bailout or anything, but a lot of these guys just have lost so much equity now that when they go back in to talk to their bankers, they can't operate the way they want to do it. A lot of them are just going to throw the towel in. And you can't blame them, because it doesn't look great on the short, the near-term horizon. But just like it always is, it seems like it always gets toughest right before you see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes it is a train, right? But we do think that fundamentally, that as we get through this fall and into next spring, that we do have some things to look forward to. Now, we know that our calf numbers are much lighter out there. USDA tells us that we've just now kind of plateaued out on our numbers, but I think those of us that have been out in the country and talked to people realize that we are really heading down the slope, and once it becomes obvious, then it's probably too late to do anything about it. But I think it's out there now. There's a lot less numbers of calves out there. These cow sales have been huge. I hear word out up in the Midwest, in the northern plains in part, especially in Nebraska, that there's going to be huge cow sales coming up this fall. So just complete dispersals. And guys are just getting out. In fact, a lot of the sale barns have already cut off a lot of their cow sales, because that's all they can really handle at one time. And so a lot of those cattle are going to be available. You guys that maybe are not very big, you've been thinking about expanding, if you've got the ability to do it, you might want to look at some of those upcoming cow sales this fall and early winter. You can get some really good genetics, some really good contained cow herds, and maybe get them worth the money. And then if we have lighter numbers coming up on this fall sale, and then lighter numbers of bigger calves up after the first of the year, and not as many cows out there, then it could be better as we start to make the corner. But you know, we just hate to see anybody giving up, and but a lot of them don't have any choice. You know, they just can't help it. Some of your guys that row crop farm or diversified, they're better at it. Your farmers, you talk about resilient. You know, they know how to make use of what equity they have. They know how to double down. They know how to live on loans. Most of your cattle people, they always want to be able to see getting everything paid for, and that's kind of how they're kind of geared more so than your row crop farmers. Also, your row crop farmers are used to getting a check once in a while to help out, and your cattle people that are just solely cattle people have never received one for the most part. Maybe if in a horrible drought they got a small check on some grazing, on some pasture that didn't exist there, but for the most part, it's guys are really having to tighten their belt right now, and it's going to be survival of the fittest, and it's going to separate the men from the boys, or maybe the men that had the equity that's been being built up maybe from generations. Maybe they'll be able to hang on, where some of you young guys that have thought this was a heck of a good industry to get into, they may not be able to withstand this. But it seems terrible when your packers are quoting all-time record profits and still greedy and digging for more. But we kind of know about that. But it's time to do something about it and call people that are in a position to make changes and press on them to get those changes made. Let's talk about the board on Tuesday. October live cattle futures up 35 cents at 99.27. December up 65 at 104.32. September feeder cattle up $1.75 at 134.15, and October feeders up 130 at 132.10. Your weighted average on last week's fed cattle trade on negotiated basis, 57,100. Thought it might be a little bit bigger than that, but then we were going into a holiday weekend like that, but and they were purchasing for a short week, so it didn't get too much. It was a little bit bigger than the light week the week before at 55,800, but compared to the same week a year ago, which was 66,600. So pretty small movement there, and your packers haven't really bought a lot of negotiated cattle ever since the fire happened. Now, they've been slaughtering a lot of cattle, but they haven't been buying a lot of cattle negotiated. They still need to buy cattle. They're not tipping their hand too much as how bad they really need to buy what few cattle are out there negotiated, but they need to buy those cattle. The heck of it is, we're coming in this week and we've got reported show lists, which if you've heard me talk about that before, I kind of take it with a grain of salt. But where there's smoke, there's fire. Some reportings of the show list were up over 12,000 head this week compared to last week, which that really wouldn't alarm me if it was the whole 5 area, but the lion's share of it was in Nebraska. Well, that's where we've kind of had our ace in the hole, is being short on market-ready cattle up in Nebraska and in Iowa, and that's what's been holding that market position as well as it has. Well, yeah, if you look back and you think if some cattle were placed after the worst of the flooding was over, those cattle would start to be ready now. So that's kind of where we're at. But that's going to hurt the leverage, what little glimmer of leverage there is in your trading for your negotiated seller. But it doesn't bode well for the market coming in to have a heavier supplies, and your packers still playing some real serious hardball. But they might want to look at this investigation, and they might want to look at this lawsuit that they've got against them, because at some point, believe it or not, I think maybe enough's enough. I don't think anybody but maybe just your packing industry wants the cattle to go the way of the hogs. But look at your prices on your weighted average for last week's trade. Your live sales of steers and heifers for last week's trade. Of course, in the north it was 105, 106 late, as high as 108 earlier in the trading session. But in the southern plains it was 103 straight across. Come out with a weighted average price of 105.59. That was $1.53 lower, but that was on your steers. That looks good compared to your heifer weighted average, which was a full buck lower. Your heifer weighted average live sales was only 104.59. But on your dress sales of steers, and steers and heifers both from 170 to 175 for the most part, and on your steers and heifers were really close, 170, 152 on a weighted average. That's $3.82 lower than the previous week. You look at nationwide, they sold 75,000 cattle negotiated. Well, that goes to show you there was a lot of negotiated sales outside the 5 area. Get up in the Great Northwest, they had several sales out that way, and you get over in the east and start working towards that Pennsylvania market, they had a lot of sales out there too. So you can see the packers are trying to pick around. They need cattle that are in loose hands, but they don't want to show their bottom card to you guys in the 5 area feeding region because they're afraid that they'll bull up, especially with the atmosphere the way it is, where everybody's real anti-packer right now and mad about the way the market is and everything. The packers are afraid that they'll bull up and won't offer any cattle for sale. But it was only 16% of that 75,000 for the 15 to 30 day delivery. But luckily they're cattle feeders, and we've already heard rumors, and this is all part of that packer psychology. We've talked about it several times before. When they need to buy negotiated cattle the worst, that's when they really start playing their cards on this packer psychology. Well, we've got rumors here that came out on Tuesday already of guys selling cattle at $1 a pound. Live, 167 dressed. And you're thinking, gosh, is things that bad? You know, if they even held it steady at the 103 in the south, that would give them a little bit of basis to that October board that's running, you know, well under $1 right now. And we thought, well, surely we'll be able to keep it steady. As few cattle as they bought the last 3 weeks or so. And then you think, gosh, why would anybody take $1? But it gets people in that mindset. So we had rumors going all around on Tuesday of live sales at $1. Not a lot of them, but it doesn't take a lot of them to get it kicked off. And 167 dressed. Well, then we start to find out later that most cattle were pretty plain, and some of them had heiferettes on them, and basically they were junk. And your packers were trying to establish some market on the junk. If they had come out and bought cattle at $1.08 and $1.75, you would not have heard a rumor of it, because they would have told the guys they bought them from, hey, this is under condition of anonymity. We don't want anybody to know about this. That's the way it goes. Let's look at your feeder cattle market. Your real-time index on Cattle Market Central late in the day on Tuesday, sitting at 139.29, just 54 cents lower than Monday, with Monday having those big specials. But latest CME was at 139.09, so just 20 cents separation on your updated real-time index and your most available cash feeder cattle index. Let's look at some sales that were out there. We know it's weaker around, but where you have offerings of any green yearlings that are left, they still sell pretty darn good, a lot better than what they pencil out at. Calves, there's a lot of pressure on the calves, and we start bringing these balling calves to the market in September and October, and there's going to be a lot of them, and it's going to be tough to get over the next 60 days, guys, until we get into some calves that are hard weaned, had some snow on their backs, had some weather, a lot more preconditioned than the ones we're going to see here early this fall. But at Four State Stockyards in Exeter, Missouri, which they broadcast on DV Auction for the first time on Tuesday, they had their anniversary sale, had a lot of good cattle in there. They actually had our largest string of cattle at Four State Stockyards. They were mixed commodity steers. 256 head of them weighed 714 at 142 1/4. As a crow flies not very darn far to Welch Stockyards in Welch, Oklahoma. They had about the most impressive quote on some big steers that had a 9 for a front figure on the weight. 137 head of steers weighed 902 at Welch Stockyards, bring 136 1/4. And Unionville, Missouri, a long ways from there, any way you go, but in extreme north central Missouri, might as well be Iowa. Unionville, Missouri, had a good sale on Tuesday. They look at these loads of cattle they had, and I like to pull those loads of steers out and let you kind of see how they sell, and they had some good sales on there. In those loads, there was 3 loads of the Rockin' R's, which always top the market. 2 loads of them averaged $8.80 at 139.75, and that one load a little bit lighter and a lot higher weighed $8.54 at $145. And that's your feeder flash for Wednesday.